Zack Snyder. He's easily the most controversial director working today. To some people, he's God's gift to filmmaking, and to others, he's a blight on cinema. But to me, he's pretty mixed. I like a few of his movies, like 300, Dawn of the Dead, or Man of Steel, you know, the usuals. But he's also made quite a few stinkers, like Sucker Punch, Batman v Superman, Army of Darkness, and Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. I never talked about the first Rebel Moon on this channel before, but it's not very good. It overuses slow motion to the point where the action scenes are dull. All the characters are pretty planks of wood with no redeeming qualities or character stories, and there's no strong narrative to keep this lifeless collection of scenes together. Part 1 is shockingly terrible with only a few positives, like the costumes or the fight choreography or some decent CGI, but even that is rough in some places.
What the hell is even that?
And on top of everything, it's incredibly derivative of other films like Star Wars. I think this is probably Snyder's worst film, and I was most certainly not looking forward to Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scar Giver. If you were thinking this series couldn't get any worse, you were kind of right, I guess. I like some parts of The Scar Giver more than A Child of Fire, but for the most part, they're equally as terrible. And just a warning, there will be spoilers, if you even care. Like the first film, the characters are incredibly dull. Korra is such a nothing burger of a protagonist. She has no characteristics outside of strong or caring sometimes. I've spent 2 full movies with her, but I know hardly anything about who she is. She's just a blank slate, and her relationship with Gunnar seems really odd. This romance is very underdeveloped and generic. These 2 characters have no chemistry with one another because they have no personalities of their own. And Gunnar is also really boring. He likes Korra and wants to help her, and that's his whole character. And because of that, his death scene is so emotionless. I couldn't feel anything watching this plank of wood cease to have sentience. And the other characters are just as poorly written. This group of warriors gets so little characterization throughout the movie that Snyder has to sit the audience down and explain who each character is. Literally, there's a 10-minute scene where each character sits in a circle, explains who they are and why they want to fight this government or whatever it's called. You know what? It's just the Empire from Star Wars. So I'm just gonna call it the Empire. And the stories these characters say to explain where they came from are really generic. The Empire killed Titus's men, so he wants revenge. Not Furiosa was recruited by that guy who died in the really funny way in the first film, so she's fighting for his memory. Bird Boy hates the Empire because they took over his world, and they killed Lightsaber Lady's family, so she wants revenge too. That's almost all the story these characters get. Although I do want to mention that they almost made Lightsaber Lady a cool character. She had a nice interaction with one of the farmer kids, and she reacted in a very emotional way when receiving a gift, but the film doesn't do anything else with her character, and she dies. Next to that kid she had the nice interaction with the one time. I guess the writers thought that one interaction was enough to make this an emotional death, but no. Also, the pacing is wonky. The movie doesn't feel like it smoothly transitions from scene to scene. It feels more like 2 giant chunks of movie slammed together. The first chunk is just Farmville. The main characters are doing a lot of farming, a lot of slow motion farming. They have training scenes and they prepare for the Empire, which is coming to the planet. But yeah, mostly farming. And the second chunk is when the Empire arrives on the planet, and it's just one big action sequence for the last 50 minutes of the movie, and it really ruins the pacing, especially in the first half. The first half is just really slow, but the second half is kind of fun and has some good action. And just in general, I think the action scenes are improved over the first movie. I guess Snyder heard all the complaints of the overuse of slow-mo in the first film because it's not used as much in part 2. There is still slow motion to be sure, and it sometimes is overused and ruins some scenes, but in general, the fight scenes are allowed to play out normally and they look pretty good. A lot of the CGI is solid, the fight choreography is pretty darn good, and there is a good variation in the types of fight scenes we get. And speaking of positives about this movie, I don't think the film is completely without praise. Most of the actors are doing a good job. Sofia Boutella does her best as Korra. She delivers the more emotional scenes, and it's cool that she does some of her own stunts. Jaimin Hansu is always great. I think he's a really underrated actor, and he brings a lot of intensity to this character and was probably the best part of the film. He also sings a cool little song, so Good for him. With his more recent movies, Zack Snyder does his own cinematography to mixed results. Army of the Dead looked pretty awful. There's a lot of harsh blurriness and a lot of unnecessary handheld shots, but thankfully the Rebel Moon films aren't that bad. Those Zack Snyder isms are still there every now and then, but in general these movies look fine. The villains of the film, as well as some aspects of the world building, are very poorly done. Atticus Noble is a comically evil villain. He wants to capture Cora because he wants a promotion or something. I guess he's a threatening villain. He kills a bunch of people, but he's just an incredibly dull character. And I thought Ed Skrein gave a very over-the-top performance. Also, this whole empire isn't very threatening at all, and I think that's mostly because of the film's poor world building. We're just not sure what the totality of this enemy force is. It seems like this huge governing power, like the Empire from Star Wars, but they desperately need the 200-ish bags of grain from these farmers? These officers don't want to completely destroy the town because of how much they need the food, which is so strange. Is the Empire really so small that the tiny amount of grain the farmers have is important enough to not orbital strike the entire community to make sure Cora, the most wanted character in the universe, is dead? But then later in the movie, when Cora sneaks onto the big ship, they decide to shoot the community for no reason at all? I guess the grain isn't important at all now? For some reason? They came to the planet for the grain and for Cora. They now have Cora on the ship, but they decide to destroy the grain. It just doesn't make any sense at all, and paints the Empire as a completely inept collection of villains. There's also a flashback scene that explains why Cora is wanted by the Empire, which was so funny. They shank the king and his wife. Belisarius orders Cora to shoot the princess. She does. And then he immediately says, "Why would you do that?" and pits the whole coup on her. It's literally the Eric Andre meme. And then at the end of the movie, Titus reveals that the princess is actually still alive because of space magic or whatever, and all the characters gather around the fire to set up Rebel Moon 3, which doesn't need to happen. The entire release model for the Rebel Moon series is absolutely insane. From what I understand, Snyder wanted to release 2 R-rated 3-hour-long Rebel Moon movies, but Netflix wanted the cut down PG-13 versions. So Snyder said he essentially filmed 2 completely different versions of the movies.
A lot of scenes that we shot exclusively for that version of the movie.
And I have to ask, why? Why make the really bad PG-13 versions at all if Snyder is hard at work at making the far superior extended cuts? Netflix doesn't have to worry about playing the films in theaters, so the long runtime and the R rating shouldn't matter. My only theory is that they released the PG-13 cuts to try and recapture the release the Snyder cut energy from back when that was trending. So in trying to build up hype for the Rebel Moon franchise, Netflix or Snyder or whose ever idea this was, killed the series on arrival by pushing out these 2 extremely terrible movies. And Moist Critical said it best when he said, "Why not just make one fully complete good movie the first time around instead of cash grabbing with a second version later? What a dumb way of making movies." It's like if Tommy Wiseau had more of a budget to work with. And he's right, this is a very dumb way to release movies. Rebel Moon is a franchise that had a lot of potential. I was very excited when I first heard about this idea a while ago, but any excitement I had is now completely gone because of these overindulgent, poorly written, lifeless movies. And if Netflix does go through with releasing 6 more of these, I will do what many other audience members will do and simply tune out. But hey, if you want to watch a video on a much better movie, you should click here to watch my review of Shrek 2, or click here to watch a video that YouTube picked out just for you. Yeah, these are 2 solid videos. I'm probably not as angry in either of these. Yeah, just go ahead, click one. You'll be happy, I promise.